This one started out as a simple question and ended in a philosophical beatdown I did not see coming. Um, I thought I was being neutral, and turns out I was actually being quite naive. So, Malcolm, go ahead, tell them what you told me.
Here we go. No quote marks, no narration, just Malcolm. Clean, sharp, unapologetic. You wanted neutral ground. You wanted fairness. What you didn't want to admit at first was that standing in the middle while both sides scream isn't noble. It's just loud confusion. You were trying to be cautious. I get it. But what you were really doing was clinging to the idea that if you just stood still long enough, maybe clarity would fall into your lap. It doesn't. You needed the slap. Because in trying not to offend anyone, you nearly missed everyone, especially the kid in the middle, the one who didn't need a label. Didn't need a rainbow parade, didn't need a purity lecture. They just needed room. Room to be unsure, room to not be your political football, room to figure things out without some adult on either side drawing their damn destination in Sharpie. That's the part you finally got, and once you did, you stopped asking which side is right and started asking the only question that matters: who's actually protecting the kid's process? And that pie, that's when you stopped being lost and started being useful.
Just going to mute him. So, on that being said, you'll see the slideshows. I'm going to start using Google Notebook LM for a lot of my content. It's just a better way of getting all of this information into one little source that you can peck away at. Watch it if you want. Don't want. I don't. Whatever. It's there. It's there. We'll see you on the next one.
You know, in some of today's most intense debates, we're always told to find the middle ground. But what if that ground isn't as solid as we think? Today, we're going on a little journey to find a truly defensible, fact-based position on gender, one that goes way beyond just splitting the difference. So let's get into it.
So many of us end up right here, caught in the middle of all the noise. And we start wondering if the safest place to be is just neutral. I mean, it feels reasonable, right? But is that feeling of safety real, or is it just an illusion? That's the big question we're going to tackle.
I bet you've heard this. Maybe you've even said it yourself. Both sides are just screaming at each other. Or the one that really shuts down conversation, just leave the kids out of it. It sounds so sensible, doesn't it? Like a safe harbor from all the chaos. But today, we're going to see if that harbor is actually safe.
Okay, so first up on our journey, let's really take apart this idea of both sides. Are the two movements in this debate really just mirror images of each other, screaming with the same volume and for the same reasons? Well, if we want to understand the both sides argument, we have to look at what each side is actually asking for. On one hand, you have a community whose core goal is about inclusion. They're saying we exist and we want the same rights, the same medical care, the same safety as everybody else. The other side's goal, though, is fundamentally about exclusion, that another group's existence is a threat and should be legally pushed out of public life. When you lay it out like that, it's not exactly a balanced equation. And that leads to a really tough question, doesn't it? Is pretending that these two goals are somehow morally equivalent, is that really a neutral position? Or does it end up ignoring who has the power and who is actually being harmed?
To really get our heads around the consequences of just staying neutral, let me give you an analogy. Think about a medical emergency. In a crisis, standing back and just debating the options, well, that's an action with very real consequences.
So picture this. A patient is bleeding out. The medical consensus, backed by tons of data, says a tourniquet is the right move. One person immediately gets to work applying it, but another person just stands back, criticizing their technique, demanding 100% certainty, asking for more debate. You see, in that moment, doing nothing isn't neutral. It's a choice. It's a choice to let the person keep bleeding.
All right, so this idea of inaction often ties into another big criticism you hear from the middle. This feeling that pride celebrations have just gotten too extreme, too over the top. And this is a really common feeling. You hear people say the grandiose show is just too much, that it's alienating. But to get why the show is what it is, you have to understand that pride didn't start as a polite request. It started as a riot.
Yeah, the very first Pride wasn't a parade. It was a march to remember the Stonewall riots in 1969, where people, led by trans women of color, physically fought back against a violent police raid. So all the things people point to, the drag, the leather, the loud defiance, that isn't just a party. It's a direct line back to that original fight for survival. It's a celebration of still being here.
And that totally reframes what all this symbolism is for, right? A pride flag isn't really a party decoration. It's more like a fire alarm. It's there to signal visibility and solidarity because the threat is still real. Think about it. You don't really need a fire alarm when everything's fine. Its whole purpose is to warn you of danger.
So now, let's take all this out of the abstract and talk about what's really at stake. Let's talk about one kid, a real kid, trying to figure things out.
So this is a story about a 12-year-old student, and we're keeping it anonymous, of course. He was just struggling. One week, he had a crush on a boy, the next week, a girl. He was confused, a little worried, and just trying to understand what was going on inside his own head.
So an adult at his school tried to help, but the way they did it was by immediately trying to push him toward a specific label. They suggested his confusion was really just him wanting to fit in, and what that did was basically dismiss his real feelings and try to pull him into a cause. But then another adult stepped in and took a totally different approach. They just told him, your feelings are 100% valid, but they don't have to be your whole identity right now. They gave him permission to be uncertain. They gave him support, not pressure.
And this story, it shows us what the real danger is, and it's something that can come from any side, by the way. It's called ideological capture. It's when an adult looks at a kid who's just exploring and sees an opportunity to recruit a soldier for their culture war.
So this brings us to the last part of our journey. What is the real middle ground? Because it's not about being passive or splitting the difference. It's an active, protective position that's built on facts and evidence.
First things first, let's just clear the air with some facts. There's this story out there that a little kid can say they're trans and get rushed into surgery. The medical reality, according to every major medical association, is a slow, incredibly cautious, multi-year process. It starts with social changes, therapy. Things like irreversible surgeries are only ever considered for older teens, and even then, it's after years of documented, persistent need.
So what does a truly defensible middle ground actually look like? Well, it looks a lot like this. It's a manifesto that's grounded in medical science. Sex and gender are not the same thing. Affirming a child's identity, starting with social support, is the only method proven to reduce harm. But, and this is key, it also fiercely protects kids from being used as pawns for any ideology. It ensures families get real, evidence-based care without politics getting in the way, and that schools can teach that diversity exists without making a second grader declare an identity.
And here's the bottom line. The real middle ground isn't about finding a 50-50 compromise between let's include them and let's erase them. It is a fiercely protective space that is built entirely around the well-being of the child. It's not about compromise, it's about protection.
And that really leaves us with this one last thought. An adult's job isn't to force an ideology onto a child. It's to give them a map and a compass so they can figure out their own journey. It's about protecting their right to explore, without being drafted into an adult's culture war, no matter who's trying to do the recruiting. And that's not a passive middle. That is a principled stand.